Welcome back to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and happy New Year. This is going to be an exciting year for the Philos Project, and I'm so excited to see what 2025 has in store. So, 2025 did not mean an end to the drama surrounding the Daily Wire. So, if you're not familiar with the Daily Wire, it's Ben Shapiro's platform. It's one of the largest conservative networks on YouTube outside of the mainstream, and they really forged the way for independent content creators to not only make a living, but be part of a larger umbrella organization. And so they were really, besides Patrick Bet-David's network, one of the only conservative alternatives out there to liberal media, especially with kind of social media being predominantly centered around left-leaning creators. So the Daily Wire broke into the space, and there's been a lot of controversy this past year with the Daily Wire. Of course, Candace Owens leaving the Daily Wire was at the center of it. And when Candace Owens left the Daily Wire, it was heated. We had Ben Shapiro, who was recorded at some private event, saying that the faux sophistication in which Candace Owens had approached the Israel-Palestinian issue after October 7th was essentially deplorable. Candace Owens then adopted this "I'm just asking questions" kind of personality to kind of cloak over some of the really crazy accusations she was making. And when she first started talking about the war in Israel, she did have a kind of just asking questions approach, which quickly turned more sinister as a scapegoat for just deeply anti-Semitic tropes, which now she doesn't even really hide from. That's become her brand. And she's just divulged into being conspiratorial. And she really has a place on social media, but in the fringes of the conservative right. But unfortunately, because of other more mainstream figures such as Tucker Carlson, her ideas are now becoming more mainstream, and she's representative of the woke right, which is a new term to define this really odd phenomena of revisionist history. We've seen Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens rewrite World War II history. Apparently, we have all been told lies throughout our education system, which is run by a Jewish cabal, that Churchill was actually the aggressor of World War II and Hitler was kind of this misunderstood villain, and that the Holocaust was not a unique evil against European Jewry, but there was a Holocaust of 12 million Christians during World War II. So this redefining of history, redefining of terms such as unfortunate civilian casualties of total war versus genocide and intentional crime committed against the Jewish people during the Second World War has become a mainstream thought. And I really hold Tucker Carlson, who was the most legitimate figure in this movement, along with Candace Owens, who's really ridden his coattails, for peddling this anti-Semitic Jewish cabal conspiracy, which has leaked into all aspects of conservative politics, whether it be border policy, promoting isolationist foreign policy, and then most recently with kind of the drama surrounding the Daily Wire. So, which brings me to Brett Cooper leaving the comment section on the Daily Wire. So to back up again, the Daily Wire is this conservative network of shows. You have Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh. I'm sure you've seen his What is a Woman or Am I a Racist documentary. Joe Rogan's been a huge fan of his. We have, of course, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Candace Owens was once part of the network, and then Brett Cooper. So Brett Cooper was this amazing talent that the Daily Wire brought in about 3 years ago to be the conservative voice for young Americans. And her channel exploded. Her channel grew to just about almost right under 5 million before she left. But I remember her channel grew almost overnight. And within the first 6 months, she had reached 1 million subscribers. And the growth rate of her channel very starkly contrasted those of others at the Daily Wire. And she became a voice, like I said, for conservative Americans. But her channel, unlike Candace Owens or Ben Shapiro, focused on kind of pop culture. So she was this conservative voice in a space that was largely left-leaning. And because of that, she filled a void in which there really was no conservative content creators, and her channel exploded. Well, So the lore goes in the conservative right circles on social media, she was ousted by this young lady here, Reagan. And the drama really centers around how Brett Cooper left. So about a month ago or so, you'll see here on the screen if you're watching, Reagan replaced Brett Cooper about one episode a week. And they said, don't worry, Brett's not leaving. I'm just filling in. I'm producer Reagan. I've been behind the scenes this entire time, and I'm just filling in for Brett. And people were starting to grow suspicious as if they were trying out this new model, this kind of copy paste version of Brett's episodes to see if it would work. And lo and behold, kind of the conspiracy that she was being ousted, or there was this transition between Brett and Reagan, became true. And so Brett did end up leaving, I would say almost maybe about 3 to 2.5 weeks ago. And her farewell video was odd to say the least. You could tell she wasn't exactly happy, almost emotional. And then Jeremy Boring, the CEO of the Daily Wire, came out and made what read really like a legal statement about Brett leaving under her own terms. And there's been many conspiracy theories about why Brett left, because that's still unclear. So we know that Reagan, who was her best friend, she was in her bridal party. Brett recently got married. She's now the host. And when Brett kind of transitioned and said, I'm leaving the Daily Wire, my producer, Reagan, will be the new host, she made no personal nod to their friendship, how important she was to her, that she was passing off the baton. There was no warm, friendly farewell and welcoming in of Reagan. So obviously there was some bad blood there. She then proceeded to delete Reagan off of her social media. As I mentioned, she was her bridesmaid. Some people have said her maid of honor. I can't quite tell from the photos of Brett's wedding, but needless to say, they were once very close friends. I know they lived in Budapest for a while Brett filmed the Daily Wire's version of Snow White. And so they spent, a summer abroad. They were in, Brett's wedding. They were in each other's lives very intimately. And it appears that she has been ousted. Now, the other big controversy surrounding this is that, as you can see from, and I'll put it on the screen again, she looks a lot like Brett. The thumbnails are exactly the same. The format of the videos are exactly the same. And even her mannerisms, which Brett was known for almost this like very intense hand motion and quick camera switches. Reagan has adopted her mannerisms while recording. And then there's been rumors that the Daily Wire got her acting lessons to basically act like Brett. So the accusation is the Daily Wire ousted another one of their hosts, just like they did with Candace Owens, except this time they literally cloned their host to continue the show. And the show has not done very well. So we can see here with some of these stats, they were at, I think I said they were almost at 5 million. Okay, so they were almost at 4 million subscribers. But you can see here that since it was announced that Brett Cooper was leaving, they've lost anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 to 40,000 subscribers a day, which is a significant amount of subscribers. So Reagan hosting the comment section has not maybe gone in the direction that the Daily Wire thought when they made the decision to part ways. Her videos have gotten about 1/4 of what Brett's videos used to receive, which used to average around 300,000 to 500,000 on like a good video, reaching 1 million sometimes on viral videos. And Reagan has barely broken that 100,000 views per episode threshold. And then we see here this significant dip in subscribers, which happened around the time of the announcement. So on the 24th of December, they lost 380,000 subscribers. So they've lost a significant amount of subscribers with this decision to part ways. Again, the controversy is surrounding what has now become the lore, because there's been no official statement as to why Brett left. And so Brett also spoke at a TPUSA conference and said that she wants to be able to tell her children that she stood by her morals and wasn't bullied. And this is where the conspiracies have now come in. So many people are pointing to the Daily Wire's kind of now repeated history of letting go of their host, or the Steven Crowder debacle that happened in 2023. And the new claim is that the Daily Wire is anti-free speech and that they're silencing Brett just like they silenced Candace Owens, and that maybe even the issue of Israel is the reason why. And that's why we're talking about it here at the Philos Project, because Israel, just like with the rest of politics on the woke right, is apparently the reason why Brett Cooper left the Daily Wire, despite the fact that her YouTube channel was entirely about pop culture, had nothing to do with foreign policy, and her personal opinions about Israel, if they did dissent from the Daily Wire's stated position, would never have come up in her show to begin with. I also want to point out, which the Daily Wire has also pointed out, there is no official stance on Israel. Candace Owens wasn't just asking questions. She even had a thumbnail after she left. Like, was it something I said? Was that why I was fired? I mean, she was peddling pro-Hamas Palestinian propaganda. She had Norman Finkelstein on, who is a huge, anti-Israel propagandist, even though he is from a Jewish family. And she was definitely peddling a narrative that was sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and issue, which the Daily Wire as a network is able to then let go of hosts who are promoting views that stand in complete contradiction with their stated policy objectives or their beliefs or opinions. Just like CNN would probably not hire a host that is staunchly pro-life, when Fox News might not hire a host who's staunchly pro-choice, abortion up until birth, because both of those networks hold a worldview, a political ideology that promotes certain policies. And so if an anchor completely diverged in a completely different direction that also doesn't represent that of their viewers, they wouldn't have an incentive to keep that anchor, that host on. And so in that very same way, the Daily Wire is within their right to part ways with a content creator who is promoting content that is opposed to their worldview, their policy positions. And that's not anti-free speech. They're not saying Candace can't talk about it. They're just saying Candace can't talk about it and get paid on their platform or be on their platform, because as a member of their platform, content she pushes out thus represents the Daily Wire. And so they were completely within their right to part ways with Candace. Candace has dissented, again, as I said, and I'll revisit this in a second, into pure conspiracy, and not just on the issue of Israel and the Jews, but with other political figures. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't a right fit, but it's not anti-free speech. And that's kind of where the controversy lies. So let's revisit the Steven Crowder controversy, because this really frames a lot of the woke right's opinions about the Daily Wire today. So if you don't know, Steven Crowder was one of really the conservative internet's first influencers, like at the inception of YouTube. He was really known for his format. He even kind of predated TPUSA's format of going to college campuses and asking controversial questions. He used to sit at a table and would say, I'm staunchly pro-life, change my mind. And he would debate college students. And so that was really his format. And he was at The Blaze, another conservative platform similar to the Daily Wire, just not as big as the Daily Wire. And so he has on YouTube still 5.74 million subscribers. He's a success. So back in 2023, he went to the Daily Wire and essentially asked for a proposal to bring him on as talent at the Daily Wire. Now, this is important because he approached the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire did not approach Steven Crowder. And they gave him basically a preliminary contract, and he did not take friendly to the terms and agreements within the contract. It was essentially a $50 million deal over the course of 4 years, so paid out over 4 years. And the deal was structured in a way that the money was then given to his production crew, and the production crew would use part of that $50 million to then produce the episode. So essentially, it was kind of like contracting out work for the Daily Wire, creating content. And Steven Crowder did not like the terms and conditions of the deal. So we'll watch some of those videos to give some context.
Are verifiably in bed with them. Big tech is in bed with Big Con. The people you thought, the people I thought were fighting for you, a lot of it has been a Big Con. Now, I'm specifically avoiding naming names or going after.
So this was the first video. He said he's going to avoid naming names. He does go on to name the Daily Wire. It becomes a whole mess. He then releases secretly recorded audio of Jeremy Boring and him discussing the contract, which seemed like a very civil conversation, and then published it. So we have this also sense of betrayal in this kind of personal relationship. It was to my understanding that Steven Crowder was a friend of the Daily Wire, very friendly. Of course, the conservative media circle, especially, back during Trump's first presidency and then after in 2020, it was very small. There was a very small number of conservative influencers such as Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro who actually could pull weight in the conservative space. But we really didn't see that push until this last election, right? And then we see other independent thinkers who might not call themselves conservatives, like Joe Rogan, really swaying public opinion when it comes to showing up at the voting booth. So this was before this election. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, there was only a few conservative influencers, and Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro were some of them. So they have a personal relationship. And so there was a deep sense of personal betrayal. And Ben Shapiro expressed this too, and so did Jeremy Boring in a video, that he would not only post the contract, which we're about to look at, publicly, but record Jeremy Boring and come out with this really heated video and feeling like this great sense of indignation and betrayal. Because according to Steven Crowder, the claim he makes is that the Daily Wire's contract is structured to censor their content creators. And we'll take a look at that. These are the penalties that he first takes issues with. So essentially, it outlines what the content creator is obligated to produce in order to get their full payment per the contract. And if they don't meet that, such as making a monthly video, a weekly video, whatever is outlined in the contract, then their pay will be docked. So essentially, this is just an outlined agreement on what the daily, monthly, and quarterly content of the creator will be in order to receive the full payment as outlined in the contract. David Crowder took issue with the stringent guidelines with this. I don't really understand that. You, especially as the content creator, can negotiate this in a contract. You're not being forced to sign it. But I assume that most media-centered jobs would come with a contract, especially if the work is kind of being subcontracted out through the content creator's own production crew, of what expectations are in order to receive full payment. But so he took issue with this, but what he took the most issue with was the demonetization of videos and how that would affect the content creators' pay.
They work on our guys. We'll punish them for you. Let me go on. Specifically, YouTube demonetization. If any of the major platforms issues a content strike such that Crowder cannot be monetized on such platform, and the company is not able to resolve the issue within 90 days, the fee will be reduced by 25% moving forward. Now, I thought this was a mistake because, these people maybe didn't know who I am, that we've been demonetized for 3 years. No, it was made very clear to me in no uncertain terms. This is what's sent out to everybody.
Crowder's taking issue with the fact that, built into the contract, if a video is demonetized on YouTube, then the Daily Wire will essentially impose a penalty fee on the content creator and they won't receive full payment for the video, which Crowder then says, well, look, you're actually playing into big tech, which is what he said in that first video I showed you. Big tech is in bed with big conservative, because the structure of the agreement means that conservative content creators are going to be more worried about making sure they get their paycheck. So they'll alter maybe what they would freely say in a YouTube video. And that's a form of self-censorship. And therefore, you're actually just peddling the liberal left's kind of propaganda or censorship of conservative thought, because you're making a content creator at the Daily Wire's pay contingent on meeting monetization guidelines. And while, yes, I do believe, YouTube has very strict guidelines that do lean kind of anti-free thought or free thinking, especially if you are conservative. We saw that a lot in 2020 as well, even on like Instagram and Facebook, and before X was bought by Elon Musk, Twitter, of like fact checking anything that dissented from the mainstream position on issues. So I think Crowder's identifying a real issue. But also the Daily Wire has to get the ad revenue through monetization in order to pay their content creators. So the stipulation is really just a business-minded one. A lot of people in the media didn't really understand Crowder's anger towards, or kind of spin that this was somehow big con in bed with big tech. So anyways, this happened in 2023. I personally don't really understand what Steven Crowder is so upset about. I also just found it to be really peculiar even then, because he approached the Daily Wire for a deal. They didn't approach him. So that would be like, approaching a company for a job, like soliciting a job offer and then just being so indignant at the offer given to you when he wasn't even being scouted as talent. So the whole thing was really odd. And then it kind of became a story for him to promote his own media company and media network, which he said was like real, true, free thinking media. I don't even know what came of that, but that kind of became his talking point when he went on the media circuit in the conservative space. So why does all of that backstory matter? Well, because when Candace Owens was then fired or let go or parted ways with, which was obviously very contentious, and there's, I'm sure, gag orders on all parties involved and non-disclosure agreements, so we don't really know what happened behind the scenes, although it's really quite obvious. A lot of people remembered what Crowder had said, and they're like, oh, well, it's because the Daily Wire is censoring free speech. Candace Owens just questioned what was happening in Israel, and then they let her go. And this kind of became a microcosm or an example of the Jewish cabal running the mainstream media narrative, our politics, our government, and the spiral into the big Jewish conspiracy theory, which has captured the attention of the woke right. But I think that's insane, because we need to remember what Candace Owens has become since leaving the Daily Wire. This is a short clip of her interviewing Tristan Tate, who is Muslim. So just putting that out there, because he already has an ideological bent. And for all intents and purposes is not a great role model or a good person. And she went to Romania and interviewed the Tate brothers. And this clip, because it is kind of short, it might seem like it's taken out of context. They're basically talking about how the West has been brainwashed to think that the Jews were actually the good guys. And Candace talks about World War II, the Jews as kind of the creators of Marxism, Leninism, that Lenin was actually Jewish. And then she talks about Sigmund Freud, a Jew, creating psychology to brainwash people. And this is where that clip is coming from.
Baphomet, they are trying to use psychology to introduce, and I read this in a book by a Jewish historian, David Bacon, to introduce, make their religion the religion of the world, yes. Right? Which is a pedophile-centric religion that believes in demons, it believes in child sacrifice, and it is the reason that we have the circumstances that we are in today, and most people won't be able to find this history.
Okay, so the Free Press was talking about this. I love the Free Press. So she's essentially now completely descended into complete derangement and just illogical revisionist interpretations of history. You saw her even there say, well, I read a book. She'll always say, like, I read a book, and because it was in this one book, or because I interpreted it to be in this one book, therefore all of history is propaganda. It's Soviet propaganda and the American education system. So first off, she's making the most insane claim that Sigmund Freud created psychology to brainwash the world into converting to Judaism, so to make Judaism the religion of the world, except for the fact that Judaism, unlike Christianity and Islam, does not apostolatize at all. That's not part of their faith or their creed or how they practice their religion in the slightest. Is an ethno-religious people group, and the ethno part being important because ethnicity is a fixed characteristic. They're not looking to convert the world. There's a long and thwarted history of Islam doing this, and as well as some dark patches in the Christian history and the Christian past. But Judaism is not one of the Abrahamic faiths in which apostatizing and converting by the sword has ever been seen throughout history. So the claim is just wild, especially her as a Catholic talking to a Muslim man, for her to make that claim and not be able to look back in history and introspectively to her own faith is really wild to me. And I'm saying that as a Christian. I think man is inherently sinful, and they've used religion in the past, and Christianity has also been used by evil powers who seek to exploit other people. And so I don't believe the religion is flawed. It's the people who use that religion. But again, for her to then point to the Jews like creating psychology as like this master manipulation to convert the world is just so wild to me. And then she goes on to call Judaism a pedophile religion, which is also crazy being a Christian, because Christianity, our faith, she's Catholic and I'm Protestant, but our faith is preceded by Judaism and the Old Testament. Without the Old Testament, there is no Christianity. So for her to make that claim about Judaism is also so wild, because by that logical claim, Christianity would then also inherit that. I'm sure she'd have some warped theological answer for me to answer that question in a way that absolves her of basically blaspheming also the Christian faith. But she's divulged into absolute lunacy. And I think that clip is important because this was after she left the Daily Wire. And again, the Daily Wire was completely within their own right to look at this and say, this is radical and this does not represent what we believe. And as a freelance, content creator, independent, she has explored some really radical thoughts and ideas, which she's freely of her right to do as part of her free speech as an American. But the Daily Wire doesn't have to promote or endorse that, which they haven't. And that's completely within their right. But the woke right will say that they were silencing her. But I also want to highlight this because I think it shows that Candace Owens is not just conspiratorial about the Jews. She's also gone after other political figures.
I'm just talking to you guys like you're my cousins and my friends. And then I look up and the media is very, very mad at me all the time. And I got to tell you, it is getting more intense out there. I think actually it's even going international. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, I'm pretty sure him and his husband Brigitte are going to come for my life, because check out this headline all the way from France. Brigitte Macron, la rumeur qui inquiétait l'Élysée. I don't know if I said that good, guys, but what it means, what it translates to is the rumor that worries Élysée.
Okay, so I showed that to highlight that she's conspiratorial about not just the Jews. She did a whole expose, a whole investigative piece on how President Macron's wife is actually a transgender man. And she went after the First Lady of France in, again, I don't really have any other word to describe, but like a deranged, just like vengeance. I don't understand why. Let's just say it is true. Let's say President Macron's wife is transgender, male to female. Why do an entire expose like on it? Why talk about it on your platforms? Like, what is the benefit of it except to be a contrarian, a dissenter, to be inflammatory, to be controversial? But that is Candace Owens and her brand. She even said at the beginning of this, like, the internet's always upset at me. Is it something I said? I'm just talking to you guys like you're my sisters, my cousins, my friend. That's like her dumb persona. I can just say anything. It can be radical. It could be crazy. But if I'm just asking questions, why is everyone mad at me? And if everyone's mad at me, it's because the mainstream media, which is actually controlled by the Jews, is trying to silence me from discovering the truth. That's what Candace Owens has become. So again, people now trying to compare Candace Owens to Brett Cooper, trying to imply that Brett Cooper somehow doesn't support Israel and that's why she was also fired, is wild to me. Candace Owens and the Brett Cooper controversy are completely separate situations. They don't have to do with free speech. Again, as I said, Candace Owens can say whatever she wants on her own platform, not on the Daily Wire's platform, being paid by the Daily Wire if the Daily Wire does not agree with what she says. We're going to look at Brett Cooper now, because many people and we'll look at this too, the arguments about to be made in the videos I'm going to show you are, again, trying to string this like Israel issue throughout the Daily Wire overall controversy, whether it be with Crowder and then Candace Owens and then now with Brett Cooper.
Gossipy. It is a little gossipy. I saw Jeremy from The Quartering put out a video yesterday. Like,
I saw the video.
The rumors. But it is interesting that you have very public and repeated issues with the same entity over and over again. But I mean, it might just be
a part of it that Crowder brought up so Crowder turned down a $50 million deal with them like a year ago, and there's this whole drama that went back and forth. And what Crowder was saying in that
essentially
debate,
these men start off their commentary. I believe the show is called The Unusual Suspects. It's part of Patrick Bet-David's media network, so another network that's kind of growing in size and rivaling the Daily Wire. These men are going to talk about their theories surrounding why Brett Cooper left. And this gentleman notes that this is a pattern, which is true. The Daily Wire has now been embroiled in quite a few controversies, whether that be maybe people management, the way that their contracts are structured. But these men specifically, especially the one to the left, is going to make the claim that it's because of Israel. So let's keep watching.
Monetized on YouTube. Doesn't matter if you give an uncensored version on dailywire.com. It's that if your video got demonetized by YouTube because Daily Wire missed out on ad rev, you get your pay docked severely, regardless of the other stuff going on. So what that is, it's baking self-censorship into the Daily Wire's cake. And when you think about, the other connections the Daily Wire has, and the things you're not allowed to talk about on the Daily Wire, it starts to get
like what?
Israel.
Okay.
And so there's
Israel. You can't talk about Israel on the Daily Wire. So this guy is trying to connect the self-censorship that Steven Crowder was talking about to the Daily Wire. And then the conversation goes on, and the other gentleman says, well, you can't really even talk about Israel and the Jews on YouTube anyways, because it doesn't meet their guidelines. And so essentially the argument is being made that by requiring Daily Wire content creators to comply with YouTube's monetization guidelines, they are baking in not only self-censorship, but essentially prohibiting their content creators from speaking on Israel, Palestine, because indicative of having to follow the YouTube monetization guidelines, they won't be able to dissent from the Israel mainstream narrative, which is a wild claim to make because, again, CNN, Fox News, I don't know if they're monetized or if those videos have been demonetized, but the mainstream narrative on both sides of the political aisle is now emerging, including on the right, the woke right. It's an anti-Israel bias. So I'm not quite sure what his point is. But here he's going to talk about censoring on Israel.
By forcing their creators to adhere to the YouTube censorship algorithms, they are inherently forcing them to censor all those things without having to make it as Daily Wire policy. Now it's just YouTube's policy, and we're just being good business people, right? And that's just me speculating. That's just me kind of putting two and two together. But when I see it walking like a duck and talking like a duck, I'm like, you guys are not good for the conservative movement if you're trying to be the conservative voice in alt media and you're forcing all of your creators to self-censor.
Call it capitalist conservative. Yeah. Conservative in theory, but very capitalist in nature in terms of how you express.
First off, we have to talk about terms. Most conservatives are capitalist. So those don't live in a dichotomy. Those actually coexist together on the ideological, right. If we're just thinking about the political spectrum, obviously we have free markets and then we have, authoritarian kind of structured governments, and both can be conservative. But I would say American conservatism is very pro-capitalism, free markets. So I don't really know what this point is. And also the Daily Wire is a business. So at the end of the day, if their videos are being demonetized, it has nothing to do with peddling a pro-Israel Jewish cabal narrative, being run by the big bad pro-Israel AIPAC Jews who won't let you dissent from that mainstream position. The Daily Wire is interested in getting paid and making money. Period, at the end of the day. And second, the Daily Wire has content creators who are not necessarily pro-Israel or pro-war. Matt Walsh has been an isolationist before this whole isolationism movement took off and it was popular to be isolationist. And the Daily Wire has pointed that out. Again, there's a difference between, proposing an isolationist foreign policy worldview or position and then being staunchly pro-Palestine, peddling Hamas propaganda, Hamas death numbers, being anti-Israel, claiming the Jews are trying to take over the world with their pedophilic religion. That's very, very different. Those are two entirely different things. And the fact that this guy can't distinguish or differentiate between that or look at it with nuance is really frustrating, because that at its core is the overarching kind of talking point of the woke right. If there's an issue in conservative media, it's Israel, and it's because you're not allowed to dissent from the Israel position. The open border, well, somehow it's the war in Israel's fault because all our money is going to Israel and not our border. Oh, the economy, well, the economy is being run by a Jewish cabal. Oh, big pharma, also run by a Jewish cabal. The woke right, just like the woke left, has attributed Israel and the Jews as this overarching problem in society that has to be deconstructed, taken down in order to rebuild society. Just like with BLM, for example, systemic racism was kind of the diagnosis of everything wrong in society. On the woke right, it's the Jews and it's being pro-Israel. And it's just quite incredible. And now we're going to see him kind of carry on with this conspiratorial Jewish narrative.
Sort of his past work about ideology and righteousness and all those things. And then you look at his stance on Israel since October 7th, and you look at, and you just try to make the two square up as the same.
He's talking about Jordan Peterson.
It's really hard to make the man that's all about integrity and, being true to your word and doing the right thing. It's really hard to make the stance about Israel since October 7th pair up with everything else he said in the rest of his career and vice versa. It's just like it feels very cognitive dissonance to me. And part of that has coincided with him making an extremely large deal with the Daily Wire and the photo of him.
So basically that clip was kind of taken a little bit out of context, but I had to speed it up in order to fit it into frame. He points to Jordan Peterson and says, well, Jordan Peterson, talks about valor and order, and he somehow has switched his position on Israel, and it's coincided with him getting a huge deal from the Daily Wire. So essentially he's accusing Jordan Peterson of being bought off by the Daily Wire to be pro-Israel, which, and I'm going to link a description, or in the description box, a link to his interview, Jordan Peterson's interview with Piers Morgan, where he very eloquently outlines why he places blame on Iran and on Islamism and on who the righteous and the evil are in this war. And he's able to do so articulately. And Jordan Peterson has been talking about, and this guy is completely right, about valor, about order. He speaks out against authoritarian regimes, both the Nazis and also the Marxists and the Leninists. Jordan Peterson is a scholar of the Soviet Union and Soviet history. He's a very well-learned man, and he does speak out against authoritarianism. He's pro-free speech. That is his entire platform, and cornerstone to that is his understanding of Judeo-Christian values. That is and has always been Jordan Peterson's brand. And there's this weird move on the woke right to go after Jordan Peterson for being pro-Israel, which is really, really wild to me because, again, like I said, Jordan Peterson has been talking about Jerusalem as the bedrock of civilization and about virtue and valor since the inception of his online presence, which started off with him just posting lectures from his university classrooms. And unlike Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson is self-made, right? So Candace Owens was with TPUSA, and then she was with PragerU, and then the Daily Wire, and then she went independent and now has this huge platform of millions. Jordan Peterson has been posting videos of his classroom university talks, and then he started producing his own videos, and then he signed with the Daily Wire. And Michaela, Jordan Peterson's daughter, came out and said it took them a very long time to negotiate a contract favorable to Jordan Peterson with the Daily Wire so that he could maintain his autonomy, whether that be in creation, the content that he was creating, or even the location of that content. He doesn't have the same stringent contract that maybe other content creators at the Daily Wire have. So this accusation that he was bought off by the Daily Wire is just character assassination against Jordan Peterson because he is pro-Israel. They're making it seem as if his personality, his persona, the ideas that he has peddled since way before even becoming an influencer are in stark contrast to being pro-Israel, when in actuality, if you look at everything Jordan Peterson says, it makes complete sense as to why he is anti-Hamas, anti-terrorism, anti-Islamism, and is pro-Israel, pro-order, and also just in favor of the fundamental right to self-determine and the righteous pursuit of restoring the hostages, of destroying and delegitimizing an Islamist organization, which is authoritarian in nature and which is a puppet to a larger authoritarian actor in the region, Iran. So this guy's accusation is fallacious. Again, it's character assassination. And there has been a huge smear campaign against Jordan Peterson on the woke right. Candace Owens even went after Jordan Peterson again, kind of like President Macron's wife just did like an entire episode on Jordan Peterson and his what he has been open struggle with mental health, being addicted to benzos, which were prescribed to him because of his mental health. He had a horrible autoimmune reaction. His wife was also battling cancer, and he's been very open about his journey. And for some reason, the woke right has looked to his vulnerability and speaking out against his dependence on medication as a way to delegitimize everything that he's ever talked about, whether it be about valor or about being, a true man or order, to try and undermine and discredit him, which I just think is particularly egregious and disgusting that the woke right now has to come out and try and assassinate someone's character or misrepresent everything that they've ever stood for and accuse them of being bought off for the pro-Israel cause because he now works at the Daily Wire. It's unbelievable to me. Okay, so now we've done a really in-depth overview. We have Steven Crowder's initial claim that their content creators at the Daily Wire don't get to operate under free speech, that they are baking into these contracts self-censorship. We then have the even more sinister implication that this is also promoting or strong-arming Daily Wire content creators into being pro-Israel. If content creators dissent, such as Candace Owens, then they get fired. And that insinuation also has now kind of been applied to Brett Cooper's mysterious leaving of the comment section at the Daily Wire. The show that she started at the Daily Wire, she built up to almost 4 million subscribers. And what I think actually happened has nothing to do with being pro-Israel. As I said, Brett Cooper's show is about pop culture. It has nothing to do with foreign policy. Even if she was the most pro-Palestinian supporter on the conservative right, it would never have needed to be a talking point of her platform, and therefore the reason why there was contention between her and the Daily Wire and her subsequent leaving of the show. What I think happened was Brett Cooper, and we can go back to what David Crowder posted from his own kind of proposed contract. I'm sure Brett Cooper had a very stringent contract, which was up this past December, right before she left. And I'm sure she saw the ROI she was bringing to the Daily Wire and thought she could leverage that to renegotiate the renewal of her contract this December, whether that be for more compensation, more money, whether it be for leniency in the guidelines or the structure of her contract. And the Daily Wire underestimated her popularity and thought she was replaceable. Because unlike Jordan Peterson, who came in with like almost 6 million followers, subscribers, Brett Cooper didn't have a platform, right? Candace Owens came in, like we mentioned, she had followers from her PragerU podcast. She brought that to the Daily Wire. Brett Cooper didn't bring her own personality to the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire brought Brett Cooper into the comment section. It was a show that they were already planning to produce. They casted her for the role. Her brand, like her personality, her as Brett Cooper, didn't exist. And in that way, I think it's also fair to recognize that without the Daily Wire, Brett Cooper wouldn't be who she is today. But that doesn't mean I think that she deserved what happened. I think the Daily Wire should have valued her as the talent that she is. Because as we saw, their numbers are suffering because of it. That's what happened. It had nothing to do with Israel. I'm so confident. And it's really tiring to hear this narrative on the right that everything is because of Israel. Everything is because of the Jews. Everything is because you don't support the Jews. You don't support the mainstream pro-Israel narrative. Again, I ask, where is that mainstream narrative? My entire job at the Philos Project is to talk out against the almost what can feel like suffocating and overwhelming anti-Israel bias in the mainstream left media, and now what's emerging in the fringes of the right, but what is moving towards the mainstream right. And we've even seen over the last few weeks, there is huge dissension within the MAGA Republican Party. It's fracturing, it's splitting. You have MAGA 1.0 and MAGA 2.0. And you have all of these conservatives, such as Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who support Donald Trump, but who somehow don't see the merit in all the incredible foreign policy work that Trump did in his first presidency, the Abraham Accords, being one of the most incredible feats of foreign policy and peace in the Middle East. He deserved a Nobel Peace Prize for that. And yet at the same time, they're staunchly anti-Israel. They're sympathetic to Iran, to Russia, to the Nazis. It doesn't make sense, but we see that lens, that worldview, this kind of just asking questions, controversial, suspicious view of government and of Jews in society moving mainstream. Like the guy that we were listening to talk about the Daily Wire and Jordan Peterson and Brett Cooper, consistent through all the controversy, he said was the issue of Israel and that they're censoring their conservative content creators to be pro-Israel. That's wild when we can't see what's happening for what it is. And in this case with Brett Cooper, it was a really sad and unfortunate example of the Daily Wire, I think, being at fault and not recognizing the talent that they had and valuing her. It has to be something darker and sinister, such as the Jewish cabal and the Daily Wire's limiting, stance on free speech and having to silence the anti-Israel policy position of their content creators. I think when the right descends into lacking critical theory and placing an emotional argument on everything, then they're no better than the left that they claim to vehemently oppose. When it comes to this recent controversy with the Daily Wire, the unfortunate parting ways with Brett Cooper, in my opinion, is nothing more than the Daily Wire making a huge miscalculation and not valuing the talent that they had. I think that they thought they made her. They had brought her into their show, the comment section. She did not have an independent brand before coming to the Daily Wire. And they made a huge miscalculation and they mishandled that professional and personal relationship. And I think that will forever tarnish, if not the Daily Wire, the show, the comment section. I don't think it will ever grow the way it did under Brett Cooper. I don't, however, think that Brett Cooper was silenced because of her position on Israel. I don't think that the Daily Wire censors free speech. Again, the Daily Wire is a media network, a platform, and they get to choose who they pay to create content and what that content is. It has to be in line with some overarching ethos or principle that guides the Daily Wire. And Candace Owens has descended into complete anti-Semitic conspiratorial madness. And as I demonstrated in this video, it's not just towards the Jews and Israel. She has a dissenting, contrarian, aggressive personality in which the Daily Wire had every right to part ways with because it did not represent the Daily Wire brand. When the right starts making an emotional appeal to everything, they're no better than the left. Not everything is about racism, just like not everything is about the Jews and Israel. If you're going to be anti-BLM and the emotional narrative that there's systemic racism, which is perpetuating the plight of Black America, then the conservative right should also be able to disavow the narrative that everything corrupt in society, whether it be the border, the economy, big pharma, even the Daily Wire, as being run by a Jewish cabal. It's overly simplistic, it's fallacious, and it scapegoats the Jews for something completely unrelated. Again, this was a mishandling of talent, of a personal professional relationship. And I wish Brett Cooper and the Daily Wire nothing but the best. But the conservative right has to stop, and we have to isolate and delegitimize the rising woke right, which is unfortunately becoming mainstream. That's everything for today's video. This was a longer one, but one I think is extremely important. The Daily Wire, even if flawed, is an important voice in the conservative movement and in the pro-Israel space. If you would like to learn more about the Middle East or what it means to be pro-Israel as a Christian, I invite you to check out our Pathfinder courses, which are fully subsidized, as well as our other media offerings at the Philos Project. If you feel so led to give to the Philos Project and educational offerings such as this, I will leave a donation link down in the description box below. And I will see you guys in our next video. Bye.